present. We have opening of Finland.
Yep.
Right, opening of Croatia. We have Bulgaria. And we have Poland B. So welcome to the semis. And without further ado, I welcome the Prime Minister to open this debate. And I guess we'll start the stream then. Well, hey there.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This time today, government strongly believes the fact that is it okay? Yeah? We start? That accessibility, participation, and the football as it is today had some serious severe problems of alienation of the local product and of course of productivity and the connection to the people to that product. For all these reasons, we're going to analyze to you why this measure of actually not necessarily implementing to all the teams around Europe or the world, to just like accept it, to tolerate it, and why not be happy if other teams approach toward that direction. For all these reasons, we will explain to you why it is beneficial for the players themselves as part of the stakeholders, why it's very good for the local society as it is, the teams themselves, and last but not least, as Mila is going to explain in a very macro level about how the society itself, the region, and the whole football as a general idea. So, first things first. What is going to happen through that measure, as explained in the info slide, is the fact that if you are grown or if you are born in these regions, then you have the right to be signed in this team. So we see that there is an inherent idea of these teams, that anyone can participate if they support this cultural idea that belongs to that region. So we're not getting discrimination, as probably the team of the opposition is going to do. What we are talking here about is the fact that we are going to give a huge opportunity, as things stand in the current status quo, to the local football players to start growing through this region. So what we see around us every day throughout the football nowadays is the fact that huge teams are buying the best players they can throughout Europe, and in the end we see that really talented young players who maybe cannot flourish necessarily, or maybe the fan club don't want to have them because they want a fancy name coming from abroad, then we see that they cannot flourish throughout the football society, and maybe after 10 years if they play to another country and come back, then they are recognized. So throughout this measure that we have, we can see that directly the young players, because if we're talking about be born in this area or grown up in this area, totally mostly we're talking about the young players from this area, they are not just promoted, but they are actually empowered to play to this team and show their characteristics in a team which is in the first league and European leagues of Europe. It's not like a local team of third round or whatever. It's not at this moment. So we give them equal opportunities that due to the current status quo they don't have, because this is how things stand at the moment. And this is a very efficient measure, and that's why we accept it. Moreover, this not at the moment. Because of this local production, it is totally connected to the financial issues of the teams. Because at the moment we see Real Madrid and Barcelona, for example, having 200 billion debts for what? Because they are just buying players to cover these fields, these fancy names I talked right beforehand. So if we produce the local academies and the local players going to play to the big team, they don't ask 99% of the times higher salaries than they want, not at the moment, that usually they ask if they are from Portugal, Brazil, Argentina in Europe, for example, or whatever. So in that aspect, we have the viability and the sustainability of the teams without actually creating debts, and it is not at the moment in accordance with the financial fair play, which is a huge big thing in Europe at the moment, and UEFA itself. So the opposition might say that, yeah, a football team is not about anything else. It's an important thing. So they don't care about the players. No, ladies and gentlemen, we can see that the players, they are quite important, and that's why we should focus and accept this idea, because throughout this idea, we can see the opposite. When the player moves from a team to another, we can see that the people are frustrated with them. The people pay attention to the players. So we find that the players are actually quite important, and we should put this importance to them, because we see that the people take care of them and they are interested in them. Not in this moment. Very practically now, the final, if we are UEFA, so like if or FIFA, like the federation in Europe or world, right? We see we are a company and we want the product to work. So very practically, very basic, down to the ground, we see that the product works. The team is doing really well at the moment. This team of Bilbao is in the European Championships as well. We see at the moment, not this moment, that the team is embraced by the local people. The football club is full. So as a federation and what we want to see around, we can see that the product we want to produce works perfectly, and the region, not at this moment, is flourishing with new players and with new fans adapting this idea. Not at this moment, of course not. So the other thing that we have to talk about is about what message do we want to send to the society itself, and this goes to what the teams are about. So the teams nowadays have been monetarily, like, more about money and not about belonging somewhere, not about creating an ID, not about actually being part of a team. So what message do we want to say? Do we want to say that if you're going to buy a player, if you're Real Madrid and you like Suarez, you just buy him? Or you want to say that, no, football is about entertainment, and football is about creating, not I will take you in well, Football is about creating ideas. And what's best from creating ideas, as Mila is going to explain further in a while, connect with them somehow. And the connection of the regional dependence, connection of actually being from the same place you are, is probably the best way to make someone belong to this team and feel part of this team, as we can understand. First.
Okay, so what you're basically claiming is that the club is promoting what exactly type of identity by claiming that only by being Basque you're allowed to play? What is the
Thanks very much. So the club is promoting the identity of the people who want to recognize themselves as a community, let's call it like that. So if they want to be in the community of Basques and they want to play in a club which is full of Basques, then for us it's just okay. If they're a community, for example, of people who have, let's say, they like a lot the purple socks, and then they decide that they want to have a team that if you want to play there you have to wear purple socks, then this is okay. If there is a team then that wants to define themselves, not at this moment, with specific characteristics, which doesn't actually harm anyone and which doesn't actually harm the product itself. So even as ideals and values, or also as a final product from the European like association or wherever, we see no harm on this. So the other problem that we see here, yeah, please.
Okay, places like FC Barcelona, clubs like FC St. Pauli, these are clubs that actually represent a certain type of identity, even though they don't limit the chances their own players have if they're portrayed, for example, as traitors once they leave the club.
Thanks very much for that question. Actually, this is very interesting because if we take, for example, St. Pauli or whatever like that, we can see that the people identify themselves with something specific and will never, for example, if we're in St. Pauli, a neo-Nazi player will play there. So actually we see that these teams, they can accept, they have different criteria, of course, of accepting different people there, which is okay by us. But in that aspect, we find no difference to actually define your team, whatever you have. Like, for example, political ideas in teams like St. Pauli, for us, is not more important necessarily if you want to define yourself with a team of Red Sox, for example. It is your choice. It is something which is entertainment. It's not like, of course, higher like culture. But in the end, for us, it is culture. And when it comes to culture, nationalities and regional IDs are involved, as we can see in every aspect of it. So practically, for reasons that we showed you for about the local football players and the local equal opportunities that they have throughout this situation, about the finances of the clubs connected directly to this local productivity, about the players which are important, as I proven to you through my speech, about how practically the final product seems to work and actually works financially concerning the teams, the footballs and everything like that, about the teams and promoting the idea that teams is not just money, but something higher like an idea. For all these reasons, we beg you to propose.
Okay, I thank the speaker for his final remarks and I welcome the video of the opposition. Here.
Okay, before I start my speech, I'd like to say that my girlfriend is watching me through the internet, so hi. And after that, we have a few problems, as we should, as a first up, with the government's case.
Order!
So there goes half a minute of my speech. So what happened? What happened in the OG speech? They forgot to mention a very important point. Why Basques are extremely special and specific regarding their national basis. Well, you might have heard of a little thing called the ETA terrorist group, which basically means that they, on the occasion, have a too big of a national identity, and on the occasion express that by planting a bomb on a bus or a train in Madrid. This is something we do not condone, and this is something which, as a consequence, while we acknowledge that it's completely unrelated to the football and anything and its activities, it has created a kind of social friction between the Basques who want to separate and the Spanish who basically are in conflict with them because of that. I'll explain that more thoroughly in my constructive, but before that, I'd like to talk a bit about the OG speech, about the Prime Minister's speech. So, Angos, first thing he said is that we have no problem with accepting a cultural identity becoming a part of me belonging to a football club identity. This is exactly what we're completely opposed. We're saying that no cultural identity, especially those of Basque, which is already extremely volatile, should be part of me being a fan of a football club identity. Why is that so? No, thank you. Why is this extremely so? Because then politics gets involved in your social activity as a fan of watching football. You sit down with your friends and a family, grab a pint of beer, and you watching a football game instantaneously transforms from I'm rooting for my team to I'm basically watching a duel between two nationalities, those people who bombed my grandmother and us, the good guys. This is something which already exists in football games. Something we've seen, for instance, in England, where we have a special class of those people, which we call hooligans. The violence is already being done at football games, and football games basically facilitate those feelings of nationalism and hatred towards other cultural logical groups. No, thank you. What we're saying here, if we have an environment between Basques and Spanish, and I agree, I will primarily talk in my constructive and rebuttal about Spain, while France will be tackled by France and the general idea of Basque nation will be tackled by Nika. What we're saying here, that in this extremely volatile environment of Spain and Basques and Basque people, we should not let the existence of a football club whose primary policy is that a person of only the people only of that nationality can play in that club, regardless of their football expertise. Go, Pantelos.
You realize that, for example, hooligans is a wrong example. You realize that Macedonia and Greece are playing basketball every year in huge competitions, and they never had more or less nationalism. Sports bring together, and sometimes, most of the times, are irrelevant to this kind of nationalistic stuff that you are mentioning already.
Kudos to Macedonia and Greece. I admire your courage and being able to restrain yourself at basketball games. So, as well as Croatia and Serbia, which played football, and basically had a duel of two Croatian basketball teams in Belgrade. Not every sports match induces violence and hatred, but sometimes sports matches extremely in a volatile environment such as Basque and Spain, like I've already said 100 times, is something we should not condone and something we should avoid. So what we've said here, that we're not in fact sending a message, as they claim, in terms of people being involved and saying, hey, you having a culturological background club is something cool and we should condone that. Well, what we're actually promoting is social friction. So that, this ends that point. What we're saying here, another point of them is, so we shouldn't allow policies from Real Madrid and Barcelona of them buying players, so we should instead have a bunch of local culturally identified clubs to serve as boot camps to those players. We don't actually believe that this is the most relevant topic in this debate, but if Barcelona and Real Madrid want to drain players from such boot camps, we find that okay, and kudos to them. And now onto my constructive. As I've already stated, our main problem, and my first point constructive of the two, is that we actually induce all the bad feelings which have been created by the ETA and the terrorist organization in the Spanish people, and bring all that emotions to a football game. What's then? And there's an even no thank you. There's an even further bad effect. As they themselves have said, that the Atlethic Bilbao is a club which is ranked very high up in the Primera, which is the Spanish First League. That kind of a club has a lot of fans, both in Basque, and some not in Basque, which is a minority. What we're saying here, that both FIFA and UEFA and any organization in charge of basically controlling that kind of competition, both the Spanish Football Association, which is somehow called, I'm not sure I pronounced it rightly, but by accepting this kind of policy, by accepting Atlethic Bilbao to involve political ideas into its existence and basically forming a team, we are saying that it's okay for them to bring politics to the football field, which is something we feel extremely wrong and is only going to serve as a cause for further conflict between Basques and Spain. So what we're saying here is, first, we shouldn't use this to bring bad emotions to the football field. And secondly, instead of sending a good message as they claim, we're sending a bad message by enabling Athletic Bilbao to spread such basically nationalistic idea and saying, hey, no matter how well you play football, if you're not Basque or don't want to identify yourself as Basque, it's all the same. We're saying you cannot play in our club, even though we are very, very highly ranked up in the Primera, and even though you could, as a football player, profit from your playing with us. This is something we simply cannot allow. Is very much against all the principles of both Spanish governments who are trying to integrate the Basque region into Spain, and both FIFA and UEFA who parallel to all this have a campaign saying fair play and let's accept everyone, they're doing exactly opposite with this. For all those reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
Okay, I thank the speaker for his final remarks, and we welcome the Deputy Prime Minister here.
I'll be extending on Angelos on 2 points. First off, I'll talk about the right of these leagues to self-determine their goals and what good football means to them. And secondly, I'll talk about the representation of local people and how that can be a positive value, and if it's important to this league, they have the right to do that. But I'll start with some rebuttal. So what we heard from the previous speaker is essentially that violence is bad. Well, we agree, and people shouldn't get heated up, and there shouldn't be terrorism, and there shouldn't be violence after football games. However, we saw no link whatsoever to why Bilbao's policy specifically causes this. I mean, the British leagues, for example, you mentioned, are very international, and they seem to cause this, and we don't think there's any more of this with Bilbao. So, and you also said they still promote some kind of identity, these leagues, so it's not necessary for these people to come from a Basque region. However, we feel that football leagues can represent different kinds of identities, and it's their right to determine what kind of identity they specifically want to promote and how they want to determine their goals. And as for terrorism, yeah, that's terrible. Maybe benign forms of expressing your identity from being from that region, like football, and seeing that league win against Spain is better than these kind of forms. We don't again see any causal link between them, so we don't feel there's any burden of proof for us there. Okay, on to my first point: the right of these leagues to self-determine their goals. Okay, so the fact is we don't have any kind of objective definition of what good football is or what a good football league is, and right now we have this common ideal, maybe, of internationally commercialized football, where you buy players from around the world and pick and choose for this kind of mismatched team. But that is not necessarily what all kind of private companies that these leagues should be somehow obliged to do. There is no kind of such single definition that they should be forced to represent. And Bilbao, for them, clearly what is driving these people and what is driving this team to be successful is the fact that they have decided to represent the region and kind of strive for that. They have pride in their culture that doesn't really get mainstream representation in the country that these people live in, and we feel that it is absolutely in their right to have this company and have this league that takes on that goal. This, and it also relates to how Bilbao performs. Bilbao is a small league that has obviously a very limited pool of recruitment, and still we see that it is quite successful, even internationally. And perhaps it is exactly this belonging and unity that creates the teamwork and performance that has made Bilbao successful, in their games, which is, the closest you can perhaps get to, defining good football. So, and I think it's a good example of how when these leagues can for themselves determine, and the people around them can determine what they believe in and what they want that league to be, it makes a better league. And the thing is, because it affects the performance of the league, that also makes it a legitimate criterion for hiring. The reason, we don't want discriminating people in jobs, and why we generally want anyone to be able to apply for a job, is because their belonging to a certain group does not affect their performance in that job. And there are exceptions to this, as a woman, if I was told that I can be a lawyer because I'm a woman, that would be horrible because it's not related to my performance in that job, like my gender. But if I was applying for a male acting role, then obviously it would probably affect my performance in portraying a male character. Generally, we do exclude some groups from hiring processes when we consider that group kind of belonging to that group to be related to job performance. And we believe, as such, it's entirely legitimate for Bilbao to kind of outrule people who they feel might not be able to or are not able to have a sense of unity, have those common experiences that make Bilbao what it is. Yes?
All the other professions requiring a certain gender or a certain specification of a person which they're hiring have a functional use. A male role has to be played by a male person, while this is basically just used to propagate national interest, as we've already explained, and basically disables people to watch football together and is pushing them one against the other.
Again, what we see is it has a functional purpose, and that's kind of demonstrated in the success of this league that obviously has a tiny region and it has tiny finances compared to so many other leagues, that is still, kind of living up to the same standards, and that is still playing as well. And we can see that there's something extraordinary about this team as a result of this policy. So we do think it serves a functional purpose. Yeah. Going on to my second point, representation of local people. So we think that it is good for people, especially underrepresented cultures and regions, to have representation. And if they want to kind of bring themselves together and have local role models, have local opportunities, that when players are recruited internationally, they cannot have in the same way, it is entirely legitimate for them to do that. And there's different forms of expressing national identity, and of course, if you if you are violent towards another group, that is a very negative form. However, we think that when you feel pride in a local team, that comes from your culture, because you can relate to them, because you see that even though you are from this small region and growing up there and playing football as a kid, you have a future because of this local league, and you can see that kind of dream of being a football player, and a successful one at that. Players, when they represent their region and their audience, that is something that creates these shared experiences that to the audience of that company makes also a kind of a better league, and also to its players. That is probably one of the main motivations, that many of the players in that region become so good that the league is also great, because they feel that they want to represent their region, and that is their driving force. And we believe that is an entirely legitimate motivation when you are kind of again, there's nothing bad in playing football, and there's nothing bad in valuing your own culture and having a sense of belonging to a certain place, a geographical place. So, we kind of so far haven't seen any of these links to these negative forms of national identity that I think everyone can agree on, and not all of this is pretty from the opposition side. And it also enhances accessibility of football to the people in this region. Again, it's not easy for Basque kids to kind of strive to compete in Barcelona, so we think it's great for them to have these local chances coming from an underrepresented culture. So for these reasons, because we think it's a legitimate criterion that a private company can have, and secondly, because we believe that representation can be a positive value in this form of expression, we beg you to propose.
Speaker, there is nothing inherently cultural specifically for the Basque or the Spaniards in football. Football is a game that's played all over the world, so there's nothing inherently connected to the way this culturally means anything for anyone. The only way it does play into the culture is the way it plays into the feelings of proudness, of being proud of certain aspects of your identity. What we're going to do now is explain to you the difference between this particular policy and how the nationalist, for example, representations who buy in players from outside, how this is actually something good, promoting good values, even though they also play up on national pride feelings and this is something bad. We're going to talk about this whole idea of Great Basque and why it's purely political in this context, not existent in the way they would like to represent it. We're going to talk about negative versus positive types of nationalisms and nationalistic feelings. We're going to talk about how this affects everybody around it. Before I do that, two very short points of rebuttal. First, the right to self-determination of clubs and things and how they pick out identities. Madam Speaker, there is a difference between picking red socks and white socks, and in a way people with red socks and people with white socks react to each other, namely they don't or they ignore the fact what colored socks people have. However, the idea of a broader Basque identity is connected, especially in this context, politically to the idea of a separatist state or a region. We don't believe this is something that's necessarily good. We also believe that, as Matti already pointed out in his POI, this is a form of a discrimination that is a completely non-functional one. The fact that they might be bonding better could also apply to ministers in parliament who, if all our men could better bond together when complaining about their wives, but we still don't believe this is a good enough reason to let people exclude other people from this group. And the second idea that this is beneficial for the local community because youngsters can now develop their full football potential. First of all, we believe other clubs in Spain and all over the world also have youth training leagues. But the second thing we believe is that it's pretty harmful for youngsters to develop in such a way when they are told that, look, you can develop your football potential if you self-identify as a Basque, and not only a Basque, but a Basque belonging to the greater Basque region. Now moving on into my construction. First, this idea of the greater region. Notice the way this policy works. This policy implies that if you're from whatever point from a greater region, you are Basque. Ignoring the fact that in some regions of the greater Basquia, 60% of the people identify as either French or Spanish, so the majority in the region itself do not claim to be Basque or do not play into this identity. Why is this important? Because this is a political move. This is a political move from the parts of Greater Basquia that would like to move towards a more separatist idea of Great Basquia, which is, by the way, geographical, not political, started around 200 years before the political idea itself. So we believe this is a tool being used to promote a specific type of nationalism. Prop side keeps claiming culture. There is a difference in types and ways of culture. This is point 2, right? There is positive feelings of something you like being nice, and then there's feelings of differentiating yourself or the negative type of different feelings. What do we mean? Culture is when you watch a theater performance or read a book and you are proud because this is something created and coming out of your culture. Nationalism is when you say, we the Basques are going to beat your ass in this game because we are so awesome. No. This type of nationalism is even worsely made in football, where generally, I don't know why football seems to cause more aggression than basketball. I really don't understand why. But generally speaking, people in basketball games don't throw bananas at black players. People in football games do. And there is a general higher amount of aggressive hooligans in football. So when this whole idea of being a Basque is amazing, it's tied to I'm now going to beat you who are something else, and is involved in a generally competitive game where the whole point of the game is to show that you're better than someone else. This creates a negative sentiment. Now recognize how this differs from national representations who, as the prop clearly stated, opt in and buy players from other places. National representations basically say as long as you work for your country, it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter who you are. If you work and become a part of us, so if you want to become a part of us, we are going to allow you. This is the message message you send when you allow players to come in. The message this particular policy sends is, no. You need to opt out. You're claiming a part of a greater political identity, even though you might be from a party that doesn't really opt into this political idea, because this is what we believe is important, opening go.
Of course, yes, opening up. So, actually, any cultural activity, for example, Greeks are still saying to the rest of the Europeans that we had civilization from other factors. So, any cultural activity we can see around the world, people are bragging if they want to brag for it.
Yeah.
So, football is not an exception itself. So, football is not different like that. It's just a game, as you said.
Yeah,
So,
okay. As I've explained, there is a difference between feeling pride about something you did is good and the feeling of you being superior, better, and having to beat everybody else. There is a difference between feeling pride and feeling that in a competitive setting, you are more deserving than everybody else. This is the difference between watching a movie and saying, this is a beautiful movie, I'm so happy that it's Basque or Spanish or Catalonian, and watching a football match or a boxing match where you're saying, this guy belongs to me and he deserves to beat everybody else's ass. That is the difference opening up. Now, the emotional impact this brings into is even harder for young people who, generally speaking, up until the age 25, don't develop ways in dealing, especially with very intense emotions, as good as adults do. So what you basically do is you take these kids in, you breed them, educate them, and force them into this idea that this is a political, that this entire region is something they should promote, something they should work for and strive for, and this makes them special. This makes them better than everybody else. We believe this whole policy is an incredibly politicized, not a culturally inherited valuable idea that is being used by certain groups to promote a very political goal. We believe it's extremely harmful for the way you frame your ideas about identity. We believe it's harmful because it teaches young kids that what makes them worthy, what makes them a part of the community is the same thing that doesn't allow anybody else to come in. You can't just move into a region of Basque and say, I really want to opt in your culture, because this doesn't work under this policy. This policy clearly states you either need to be ethnically Basque or you need to be raised here. There is no fluidity here, unlike national football teams who do allow you to become a part of someone. We believe this promotes intolerance. We believe this makes it even harder in regions that are already problematic to engage. We believe this is even worse in football situations that are generally high energy, high emotion, highly competitive, and very aggressive in themselves. We believe it harms the general feeling of national unity on the region. We don't mind that people opt into a Basque identity as well as others. What we do mind is that if they take it out, claim it's not connected to anybody else, nobody else can opt into it, and it should be promoted on a very political region-like idea. We beg you to oppose.
Right, I welcome the member of the opposition. You're here. Government, of course.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The lower half of the government will try to look at the debate that we started from a bigger perspective, because we felt that the sides so far have really concentrated on just looking at the Basque example, and we think that debate is really about much more than just that. I'll first start by clarifying that sport is not about violence. Sport is about competitive spirit. Sport is an alternative to violence, and it provides an alternative possibility for non-violent rivalry, for non-violent expression among different identities. Because it is a matter of fact that actually since the introduction of this policy in the club of Atlethic Bilbao, there has been, this introduction has coincided with a decline in the extreme nationalism in the region of the Basque, which is not surprising since we haven't in recent years, the influence of the ETA group has really declined, because people have found a better peaceful expression to identify themselves with a theme, to express their their belonging through a peaceful way, through sports, through something that, although inherently connected to politics, it is an alternative, a non-violent alternative, because politics and sports have always been connected. Let's face it. Like you have examples, like in the Cold War, we've had, the sportsmen from the Russian side, from the USSR side, have competed with the sportsmen from the US. But this was something good, because like it never resulted in any violent, violent expressions or something. And which is why we see this as a really good alternative, as a positive alternative for both sides, and it causes really no harm whatsoever. It promotes peace and understanding, actually, because sports is about a competitive spirit, about showing, about trying to be better, about like putting all yourself out, like supporting your players and getting out there and showing that you can be better, showing than the other team in a in a game with rules where there's a clear winner, not in a violent acts or events where people are hurt and where extremism is encouraged. Yes, please.
I'm willing completely to agree with that. I still don't understand why, in order to achieve all those things, I need to be excluded from a specific team in a league of which I pay tickets to and enjoy.
I mean, you are not excluded, sir, because you have the right as classified to be part of this team as long as you show belonging to the club. Either you are ethnically Basque or you are living in this area since the age of 8. So we don't think that people are excluded. Then a second thing that we want to say is that this policy that the club is employing is actually good for the people and for the club, because in contrast to what Real Madrid or Barcelona are doing by buying the expensive players from elsewhere, Bilbao is developing its own players and then it sells them for a lot of money to other clubs like Real Madrid and Barcelona. And what it does with this money is that it reinvests it into the Basque region. It promotes sports. It promotes the development of kids, which we find really much better than just creating these commercializing machines like what Barcelona and the big teams in European sports are currently doing, because they are turning sports into a money making machine rather than something promoting health, something promoting positive values within kids, within youth, within society. Lastly but not least, again, as I started, I feel like we concentrated really a lot on just this simple example. But by the topic says we support Atlethic Bilbao's policy. And I believe that this any club that employs this policy would actually bring much more good to its region or to its place than like engaging in the policies of big clubs, buying and selling and just commercializing, because exactly because you create this identity within people, you strengthen this identity, you provide them with an alternative way to expressing themselves, to aligning themselves with the values, with a team, in a peaceful way, and by providing economic benefits, sports benefits, health benefits to kids, to people who are interested. Because again, like as mentioned by the opening government, kids have the belief and have the opportunity to really grow in this club. They are not disregarded because the club buys some players, some ready players from somewhere else. No, the kids know that they have really the chance, and they don't have such big competition. Like, they're not competing with the whole world of sports people. They are competing with the kids in this region, and they have the real chance to grow. And once they grow, they could be sold. Okay, let them go. But then the money, for this big money that the clubs get, it reinvests again in education, in training of kids, which we see that brings benefits to every single club that employs such a policy, not just to Bilbao. So for these reasons, that it actually promotes non-violent rivalry, an alternative to violence, and it promotes economic prosperity and promotes health values among kids, among the youth. We are really proud to stand on this side of the house, and we beg you to oppose. Thank you.
What's the thing?
We ready?
Yes.
Madam Speaker, not a whole deal of a lot was said from the previous speaker. In general, what we heard is that sports is something that can be replacement to war, which I assume, especially if a sport event is happening and not a war, we know that at least that's there and the other is not. We did hear something about how this money could be sold to later on to Barcelona and greater clubs and therefore go to money. But if we look at what actually happens, we see something differently. That something different happens once you enter racism into the equation. I'm going to talk about the good for the player, because this is basically what First Gov promised us. And I'm going to talk specifically about the problem of a minority within a minority that these clubs create and this sort of attitude creates. Then I'm going to talk about the club, because there seemed to be this assumption that, oh, it's great when we win, we see we're wonderful. Madam Speaker, there's always a loser in a sports game, and they never discuss that. Then we're going to talk about the issue of the fact that these sports are actually, don't even try, the fact that these sports are actually an extension of a league, of a greater league, that they need that league, and why they owe that league something. I know you don't like things that don't have practical harms, but there is such a thing, Madam Speaker, as unfair. Now, let's now talk about the player himself. Now, first of all, we don't think that it's okay that you cannot choose to go to a club for something that you didn't choose. A neo-Nazi will probably not want to play in a place that presents socialism and happy, fluffy, lovey ideas. So we're fine with that. It's okay if it's an ideology, because that's something you can be convinced to, and there are different things that you could do. It's not okay when it has nothing to do with what you chose. It is degrading to your ability to be a human being. But that is to be a human being and separate yourself from the Untermensch and other stuff like that Nietzsche talks about. But we're not going to go into that, okay? But let's talk about, so you're already degraded because you're told you can't be in Team X. That already was spoken about by First Up. The interesting thing is what happens when you actually go there, when you don't want to be. Because if you're a young, successful Basque player and there is this team, you are expected by your community, after this thing was fostered, to go to the Basque team. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe you don't want that because, as First Gov say, they pay more in other places. Yes, it may get you easier into the league and stuff like that, obviously because it's less competition. Again, we never understood why you've earned that benefit, but maybe you don't want this thing. But your society, and if we live in a world where race becomes an issue and race becomes important, your society, your mother, your father would like you to contribute to that community. And suddenly you find yourself funneled into a specific team while everyone else in the world can get a better choice. I mean, of course, everyone else of similar ability and similar quality. Now, they can say they can sell you later on, but unfortunately this is not what happens. What does happen is that when teams want to leave, when players want to leave the team, in many cases, that is like, oh my God, what a traitor and stuff like that. He betrayed the team. We all feel like that. But in the cases of sports groups that actually have an ethnic base, it becomes betraying of your identity. You can't move on to Barcelona if you want to. You can't move on to Bayern Munich. You can't move on anywhere because suddenly you are not just betraying oh my God, the team, you are betraying mommy, you are betraying daddy, you are betraying the place where you grew up. Now, this is you should have taken us, it would have been nicer to you. This is a very problematic thing for a person because it's actually saying no to a lot of parts of your identity, which means that your choices are limited. Maybe you wanted a different coach, maybe you wanted a different team, but you are now afraid to leave because you can't. If you're a young player without much chance, maybe you think a better coach can promote you in a better way. You can't even do that because right now you also have to face the demon of racism. So what they basically do, and why do they pay less, by the way, to their players, is by using the fact that they know that you come from a racist area, by promoting that racist idea, by fostering it, they're able to get you for cheaper, and they know you'll have a harder time leaving. Yes.
Yes, also already pointed out, people who are not ethnically Basque and do not consider themselves Basque can play in Atlethic Bilbao, and also in the Basque community there are clubs that have Spanish identity and still
Okay,
can
I'll be
still
honest,
play.
Madam Speaker, I don't know specific about this thing, considering the fact First Gov and your team said that we're talking about generally increasing this area. I think it's fair to talk in general principles about it. It's possible that in Basque there's a loophole specifically. I think growing up from 8 is kind of the community where you grow up on. That I grew up in my community from 6, and I really, really feel like I belong to it. I'd be hard-pressed if they told me that in order to get the job I want, I'd no longer be considered Polish. Okay, now, let's talk about the teams. Okay? Now, obviously there was something very interesting about what they did, because they said, listen, it's great when we win, everything becomes like, everything becomes wonderful and we see this great support. The problem is that teams don't always win. And when that happens, and if we see more and more of this like they're promoting, teams will lose, and they will often lose where they were poor. And what happens is you get this reinforced racism towards another person. Now suddenly there are other teams like this, and if we support it, that will happen. We eventually see that you're not winning, and you're not winning because the money is in other teams, because they have better facilities, because we were cheated, because that referee wasn't fair to us. This can also be in other sports, because that goal should have accounted. Suddenly it becomes, when you lose, a force of frustration that is automatically linked into the racial divide that this team is promoting. But finally, and very interesting, Madam Speaker, people love Barcelona, and they love only Barcelona, and they will die for Barcelona and not for Real, but they won't love Barcelona as much if there wasn't a Real to hate, a Real to beat, which means that your success as a team only works because you have a league with you. This, the love for the sport is a communal thing. And how does this work? It works in the way that we as the league, we give you the platform where you can play. We provide you the match. We provide you the tickets. We provide people who love the sport and allow you to grow. And in exchange, you know what we're expecting from you? We're expecting from you to train youth. Yes, we know you have interest when you do so. You also have an interest to do so. But we expect you to go to Africa and to Latin America and search for young players to make the league better, to make the league increase. Not be just about the only race, not about your race or your region. Because if it was just about your race and your region, you would be the Basque League. And no one would watch you. The reason you're successful is because you're in La Liga, and you're an extension of La Liga. And yes, we believe that a team has an obligation to help that sport grow, not just in their area, but from it's not the Urals, whatever amount, the Ardennes, and down all the way to the Straits of Gibraltar. And in a beautiful way. The point being, Madam Speaker, is this is not good for the players. It's not even good for the players who are there. It's not good for the team, because these teams sometimes lose, and it creates this horrible community of an environment of frustration. And in the very end, yes, you owe something to the league and to the extension that made this team that made the sport so beloved.
Okay, then we welcome the government whip to summarize this debate for us. Here.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to be the government whip in this debate. I will start with addressing issues raised by the speaker before me, and we'll actually refute them. I'll start with the part that players indeed have the choice not to play in a club whose ideology they do not agree with. We agree with that. It's okay, yes. However, the opposition claimed that a player feels degraded if he is not allowed to play in a specific club. However, as pointed out already, players actually have the right to play in all the other clubs in La Liga. They can join Atlethic Bilbao from clubs that do not have Basque identity. As already pointed out, there are a lot of areas in the greater Basque community where the Spanish people are actually a majority, and people who play in clubs from these communities are still eligible to play for Atlethic Bilbao later, even if they do not consider themselves Basque or are ethnically Basque. Therefore, they shouldn't feel degraded. You also claimed that there is actually something like peer pressure that you are expected to play in that club. That you need to play there because you'll be a traitor. Again, we go back to that there are areas where you play in Spanish Cup and are still eligible to play. There are players in the Athletic Bilbao team now that have this identity. They do not consider themselves Basque, but they still play there. So it is expected of you to excel as a sportsman, preferably in Athletic Bilbao, but you can go to other teams as well. There are other big Basque teams, big Spanish teams, which is proven by the transfers. I'll explain about that later. The next part actually is that if you are sold, you are called a traitor and so on and so on. This is actually the case where and you said you are afraid actually of racism, because this is not the case. A lot of Basque players have moved both abroad and in La Liga. There, for example, Xabi Alonso is a major player in Real Madrid, which is actually the establishment club in Spain, which is which is the rival club of Athletic Bilbao, and still he's greeted respectfully in Bilbao. Therefore, they do not consider him a traitor. He's played in many other clubs and he still plays there. There are other Basque players in Real Madrid over history, in Barcelona as well, in foreign teams as well. I already explained about that the Basque community is not only Basque. You claim that if you lose, you hate the other teams. Well, this is sometimes the case, but I would like to point out that in Bilbao, actually, there are very little fights connected to football. Very little fights. In Valencia and in Madrid, where there is social difference between different clubs, for example, Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid, there are big fights, but not in Bilbao. It's usually peaceful in Bilbao, and that shows that the Basque people actually respect other teams, even if they believe their team is better, which is, of course, usually the case for every sports fan, not only a Bilbao fan. You actually, really, you said something very, very true. You need a league, you need a rival to feel the passion of the sport. Well, yes, but when you can differentiate yourself from the rival on many levels, you actually feel more passionate about the sport. So you go and play this sport and you... Yes?
No, you do exactly the opposite. The old psychology of small differences, which is you start emphasizing on the differences and opting in that being Basque somehow. Being a part of the greater Basque.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. Yes, and this actually increases your pleasure of the sport when you win, because it reaches down to your fibers of your body. That's why actually it's better to have cantina. No, thank you. You said that we should look for young players to improve our Liga. I'd also ask to point out in the explanation before this debate, actually you can be Basque from a foreign country and still play, no thank you, and still play in Athletic Bilbao if you have not grown up in their youth system. I'd like actually to, relating to the fact that the minister in this debate point out that this is also about other about this idea of identity, and not only in Bilbao. I'd like to point out that there are several teams, actually examples of how teams who have employed this certain policy, well, of course, different countries, actually suffered when they removed it. For example, Glasgow Celtic in Scotland used to have policy to only hire players from 10-mile radius from their stadium, and actually in 1966 they won the European Cup with only players born within 7 miles of their stadium and only Catholics. Soon after that, the policy was removed, and Celtic has struggled since then to regain this former status. Also, another big Basque club, Real Sociedad, until the 80s had the same cantera policy, and actually until the 80s it was the golden years of the club, and right after that it swamped even down the leagues. So teams who have built this culture in their own in their entire identity. No, thank you. If they had to remove it, they would suffer from that. Their sports excellence would suffer, which is actually the main thing about sports. Now, I would like to point out that you actually touched very briefly upon points made by us, and I would like to summarize the debate. First of all, we had a debate about the alienation of local produce versus that the Basque identity is actually why it is special. I would like to point out that it is special simply because, aside from across the autonomous community of the Basques, Athletic Bilbao together with Real Madrid and Barcelona is actually legally different for other clubs in Spain and answers to different rules. Now, what you didn't comment about our extension is that, namely, you can achieve political peace. You agree that you can achieve political peace and avoid war if you invest in sports and actually turn your mind to sports from the same reason. And actually, this is actually more important than everything else discussed in this debate, because political peace is more important than benefits for players and so on. Thank you very much.
I thank the earlier speaker for his final words, and I welcome the opposition whip to summarize this debate. There you go.
I'm going to talk about three things today. So firstly, about how ethnicity-based football clubs are creating those notions of political ideas being transgressed as defined by first opposition, but also has limiting the individuals that the opportunities that individuals have as football players, and we think that it really matters in this motion as it is a motion about football. Then I'm going to talk about why we think that because you cannot exist as a football club outside of La Liga, because as a Spanish football club, you cannot exist outside of leagues. We think it's really important that you don't use those leagues as a platform for something that the other members didn't consent to for you to represent. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about would be about are we in the end making football worse or better for the fans, and generally if we're allowing Bilbao to continue with that with their policy. But the one thing that I want to say before I move on to that is that the example that they give of the other Basque club that went under once it stopped implementing this policy is exactly what we mean in this debate. We mean that this is limiting the opportunities for the individuals. This is defining the one right way in which you can be Basque, but not any other way. It is meaning that you can only embrace your identity through being exclusionary, through not accepting the fact that you can integrate with other cultures, with other communities, and be a participant of a wider community. And that's why we think what this debate really comes down to: the way you limit an individual's choices when you force them to embrace their identity in this one specific way. So what is wrong with that? So what we've told you in this debate is that it basically creates the idea that you need to protect your ethnicity, because if you don't allow outsiders in, it means that there is a hostile threat to you once you do that, right? You need to protect it because there's a particular positive discrimination policy that means you need protection, and therefore other people are generally hostile to you. What we think the consequences of that are. So the thing that the one thing that we've told you is that it means that for because this is basically what the first op established. But what we've told you is that it means for Basque players that are not really able, unless they're Xavi Alonso, to make such an achievement. Because Xavi Alonso is good enough that people are going to propose him as support him as a representative of their community, even if he doesn't play for Bilbao. But what we say is that for smaller players, for people who are still young and for actually want to get out of this and want to decide for a career that is better for them individually, this means that they have limited opportunities and are seen as traitors because it is related to their ethnic identity. The second function of that is that it promotes the idea of sharing of the Basque culture that is done in a wrong and a right way, as I've told you. This means that you need to be exclusionary to be truly Basque. It means that the function of this identity is to mean to other people that you are a specific, distinct group, and that if you interact with other people, you are going to lose on that. And that's why we think that this idea of a threat is something that is created by a policy that says we don't want outsiders inside here. The last thing in this point that Shepi told you is that the way in this range reinforces racism by specifically being a football club, which means the sports to which emotions are and the typical grievances that people have in sports, like unfair referee, etc., etc. It happens everywhere, but it has a different function once we are excluding other individuals, once we're saying it is a racial thing, that you need to be like self-identifying Basque, and this is the only way you can get on the team, and you are reinforcing racism, and we think this is particularly harmful, especially in the communities that are like psychologically harmed by that. The second thing I want to talk about would be about like why we think that when you're a part of La Liga is unfair. What the first op talked about, that you're supporting a nationalist cause. Like, we agree with the fact that yes, it is basically a political thing that they're doing, but we think it's even more relevant when you're doing it within the context of La Liga, when you're doing it within the context of other greater entities in which your football club functions. It is basically like we've already told you. You need opponents. You also need the viewers. I mean, the popularity of La Liga is basically how you build, how you are able to function, right? The moment at which La Liga is no longer viewed by so many people, you don't have the revenues from like this being screened. Therefore, we think you rely on those. Like Shepi told you, we rely on those other people. And the moment at which Bilbao is like taking the trust of like La Liga and being simply unfair to them by using the fact that people are willing to watch good football, that people have paid for because they're getting footballers from all over the world. It means that we are using something that they consider to be their achievement for the nationalist, for the political cause that we've already described to you. We say this is using this platform in a very unfair way, and we don't want, and we think that it's like particularly harming Bilbao as something that like uses the Liga in a bad way. Go.
You do realize that all these clubs started from the local level and they didn't force themselves to the La Liga, which means that the model is successful at the moment. They have people supporting them, so they are in La Liga because they deserved it from the laurel stage. They were just be put there.
Well,
so
yeah,
that model works.
Yeah, like of course they're good at football. Therefore, they are a part of La Liga. They're also part of Spain. Therefore, a part of La Liga. Like we agree with that. Now, the concept we're talking about here is if this is fair that they're using this as a platform for advancing something that is political, and we don't think it's fair because those other clubs have not consented to that, adopting policies of like getting a deficit because they're getting a player from another country to make La Liga interesting for people to watch. Because when Bilbao is playing in Barcelona, more people go there and pay like 90 euros to actually watch that game. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is like if this is in the end better for football. And so like there was like this general idea that football shouldn't be about money and should be about something else. But what we've told you in an extension is that essentially this is impossible, because the only way for your football club to function is when you are a part of something that is essentially commercial, because it's your national league or like European league or like Champions League. These are essentially commercial enterprises, and the only way for you to function in them the only way for you to be a successful football club is to function in them. Therefore, we don't say that there is a possibility to like distract football from money. We say the point at which though all of those interests become interwoven with racism that is inherent to the idea that other people are hostile to you because you don't want to, created by you because you don't want to accept them. We say that in the end it makes football, it doesn't make for a better football that somebody is racially excluding other people from their team. We say that then at this point not enough research goes into finding new players, and the league itself is suffering from that. Therefore, football itself is suffering from that. So because we think that it creates ethnic tensions and it's a platform for a political cause, because it's unfairly using something that unfairly using La Liga, and because of that it decreases the quality of football that we watch by making it less good players from all over the world, and they don't put an effort into that. We beg you to oppose this motion.
I thank you all for fine debate. Also wish you hands.